Right, we're just on 7 o'clock, so I'll formally open the meeting, and I'd like to welcome all members of the public and members of the committee to tonight's Economy and Place Scrutiny Committee held on Thursday, the 8th of June, 7 p.m. And just to remind you that this is being recorded for a future publication and also live broadcast tonight. So we have 11 items on the agenda, of which 4 of them are substantive. So I will start with item 1, which is apologies for absence. I have had substitutions for Councillor Bentley Smith, which is Councillor Holland, and Councillor Beeston, which is Councillor Fox-Hewitt. Are there any other apologies, please? No, thank you. So declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare an interest in any item on tonight's agenda, please? That's a no. So we'll move on to minutes of the previous meeting, which are on pages 3 to 8 of the pack. Can we move those, or would anyone like to make any comment, please? All happy to move. Thank you. So that takes us on to item 4, which is update from Cabinet. Anything to add, Councillor Sweeney? So no update. So we're rapidly moving on to sorry, Councillor Moffat.
Thanks, Chair. Really, it's just a point of order. You did make a comment about there being substantive items on the agenda for tonight. At previous meetings, we had brought to attention to this group that packing an agenda made it very difficult for us to scrutinise in the fashion that these agenda items deserve. And I really feel like this agenda is far too big for the work of one meeting. These are really important items that have been put on the agenda, and I don't think that we can do all of them justice that they deserve. Thank you, Chair.
Your point is noted, Councillor Moffat. What I would say is that we will go through each item and give it the time that it is necessary, and we will not shortcut any of those items. I will ensure that through the chair. So we'll move on to the first substantive item, which is item 5, an HS2 project update. We have Victoria Roberts, who is the Senior Engagement Officer from HS2. She will make a presentation and give a presentation to us this evening as an update. There are then 3 members of the public who have asked questions in the 48-hour advance notification, which we'll take, and then we'll open it to members' questions. So over to you, Victoria.
It's better. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Yes, as Gary said, I'm Victoria. I'm the Senior Community Engagement Manager for Phase 2A. So today I'm just going to give an update on the back of the recent government announcement around Phase 2A, HS2, and what that means for this area, and then talk about some of the stuff that we are doing in the area and hopefully answer any questions anybody will have. So moving on to the rephase update. So some of you may be aware that the government updated Parliament on their Transport Capital Programme on March the 9th, and that statement included an update on the HS2 project, particularly recognising the significant inflationary pressures that we're facing across all parts of the UK economy. The government has strongly reaffirmed its commitment to delivering HS2 all the way from Euston up to Manchester. So that very much includes Phase 2A and this section between just north of Lichfield up into Crewe. However, in line with the government's direction, we are currently rephasing this section of the route as we develop that scheme further, and that development work around the scheme will be continuing. So what does this rephasing mean? That means essentially that the main civils work between the West Midlands and Crewe has been put on pause. And during this time, we will be continuing with some vital preparatory work that's already underway, but some of the work that we plan to take plan to take place over the next couple of years has also been put on pause. While we're working on that rephasing of the construction programme and what that looks like, the new delivery into service date range is being worked through. So we don't have that confirmed as of yet, but will be shared as soon as we do. So some of the vital preparatory work that we will be doing will be some of the live utility diversions that are underway, some of the environmental habitat creation that's also underway, and we will also importantly be continuing with the land acquisition programme across the area to make sure that we have the land that we need to build the new railway. So looking into that in more detail, looking first at the utility diversions. So there was 3 live utility diversions that are underway across the whole of phase 2A. There's none in the borough at the moment. Those 3 will continue. However, 2 that are one sort of along the A34 Yarlett, which is nearby, they will be demobilised and reinstated before the work is then rephased at a later date. And any further ones will also be reprogrammed into the HS2 programme. What we are doing in this area, we obviously have the 2 Whitmore and Madeley tunnels, and as part of that we do need to have the power supply routed through to support those. We are still looking at the options of where that route is. That optioneering is still going to continue, but the timeframes for that work is still being worked through around resource, and as part of that, we may need to be going out doing some surveys to help inform that optioneering. And if we do have to do that, we'll obviously come out and talk to communities about what will be happening around that area. Moving on to the early environmental works. So these are the sites that we've been creating to provide new habitats for some of the species that we will be translocating once the main construction or ahead of the main construction work starting. We have been delivering these sites and building these sites across phase 2A, and there's about 76 in total, and this work started in January 2022. However, we are now looking at which sites we will complete and which sites will be put on pause. The majority of the sites will be completed across the route. Most of those sites will be completed to sort of summer 2023, so a lot of those sites are now being sort of finalised with the last bit of planting being done. In this borough, there are 2 sites that have been completed. So one is near Onley, Madeley and War area, and the second site is near Baldwin's Gate. So those sites have been completed, and they'll just have the maintenance programme by Balfour Beatty. There are further 8 sites in the borough. All those sites have been put on pause, so there won't be any activity on those sites until later in the programme, where they'll be rephased ahead of the construction taking place. Along those, the 2 sites that are established, we will have a maintenance programme. So there will be some activity of our contractors going in to check those sites, make sure that they're establishing, do any maintenance that's needed, such as pruning and things like that. Sometimes, depending on the nature of the access to the site and what they need to do that work, there may need to be some short-term traffic lights and things like that put in place. But again, there'd be advance notice of anything like that taking that we need to do. When moving on to the early civil works package, so this is the 2 major road modifications and junction modifications that we're doing. The first one was in Wood End Lane near Lichfield, and the second is the Handchurch interchange. So the design for that is still going to be developed. So that's going to be developed to the detailed design, but it won't be taken through the approvals process with the local authority. It will essentially be put on pause at that point once we've got a detailed design and re-picked up at the relevant time later in the programme. So all the surveys that we've done or have been doing in relation to that, as well as any of the construction that would have been taking place on the previous programme, has been again put on pause. The Newcastle Road residents have all had a letter to inform them of the pause in the work and what that means for them and their individual circumstances, because a lot of them have individual things that we're working with them on, and the commitments of those conversations still stand. It's just a case that everything will start later on in the programme. When it comes to the early civils work package 2, this is the series of 21 locations where we're doing road modifications and improvements to support, again, the traffic flow or increased traffic flow with HS2 construction. In this borough, there's one site, which is the Blackbrook Junction, so just near the Swan with Two Necks. So again, all the surveys have been paused with that work, and the design development has been paused completely there. So they won't be taking those designs through to the detailed design, and that work will again be rephased. So there'll be no further activity or development on that project or on that contract, which was being delivered by Kier at this stage. So that's sort of the overview of the preparatory work that was underway. In terms of the land possession programme, so the land possession programme we are still continuing with, and that will be under the compulsory powers that we have as part of the HS2 Act. So if we move on to the next slide, one of the key reasons that we are continuing with this is because the powers that we have under the Act have a time frame, so they would expire if we sort of delayed those, and there's a need to make sure that we have all the land that we need to be able to remobilise and deliver under the new programme once that is finalised. However, we do recognise that in possessing some of the land earlier, whilst there might not be work on that land for a period of time longer than previously expected. What we are looking at and what we are discussing with landowners on a case-by-case basis is things such as grazing licenses and cropping licenses, to look at ways that that land can continue to be farmed during the period that we don't need it as part of that programme. And where there are, for whatever circumstances, reasons that land isn't suitable for those sorts of work, we will be maintaining that land. So that land will be fenced as part of that possession process, but we'll be maintaining that appropriately during the period that it's in our ownership, ahead of it being used for any construction activity. So the slide here just shows the timeframes for some of that possession. So within this area, we are across 2A. We're doing it slightly differently to how we possess the land in phase 1. This is based on the lessons we learned from phase 1. We are basically purchasing the land in sort of one go in these big, what we're calling super shapes. This means that for landowners, they get a single notice rather than lots of different notices for different parcels of land. There's a clear single time frame for them, and it means that there's an ability for them to better plan what's going to happen and when that's going to happen for them and their circumstances. However, we obviously recognise that it's very difficult for a lot of landowners going through this. So we are engaging early, and we have been engaging early with their agents, with the landowners, to support them through this. And there's obviously the engagement team, myself and colleagues, who are also there to support as needed, should they need any additional help to what's being provided through our land and property team. So once the land is sort of completed, so that's going to take another couple of years. As I said, we would be maintaining any land that is not covered under any tenancy agreements that might be agreed. So that, in a nutshell, is where we are with HS2 phase 2A now, as a result of the recent announcements. So there's a lot of things that have been put on pause. There's a lot of things we still don't know in terms of timeframes of the programme and the specifics of when some of this pause work will be restarted in the area. But once we do know that, we'll of course be coming out and communicating that to communities and stakeholders such as yourselves, to make sure everybody in the area knows what's going on. So one of the things that we have had quite a lot of questions on is the community and business funds. So these are the funds that are available for communities and business organisations to apply for in disrupted areas. These funds, which is about £5 million, well, there is £5 million available across phase 2A. These are still available. There's no change to these funds. Any applications that have gone in will be progressed as normal, and anybody who's looking to submit a fund or application for some funding can do so. There's the two types. I talked about these last time I was here, so I'm conscious I don't want to repeat myself, but if there's any questions or people would like to know more about the funds and what they entail, then please do reach out to me. I'm happy to talk anybody through those. But essentially, there's projects that people can do to support and bring a benefit to some of the communities that are disrupted as a result of HS2. And there's up to 75,000 if it's a local fund. So that means it's local community that would benefit from that project. And then up to £250,000 that's available for a more strategic fund. And that would mean that it would have to incorporate a wider number of communities that would benefit from that project. So in terms of where we are with those funds, we have awarded over £300,000 now, if we move to the next slide, sorry, to projects across phase 2A. And I'm pleased to say that we have got one that's recently been announced in the borough, that's Madeley White Star Football Club. So they've been successful in being awarded £75,000, and that's to create a bespoke community and sports hub within the area to help them serve as a base for the community and local groups as well. So that's a project that's just been announced, so it'll be really exciting to see that come through. And again, any further projects within the borough, we would encourage people to continue to apply and look at that as an option. Moving on to what we are continuing as well is the sort of education and skills and jobs piece that HS2 is bringing to the area. So in terms of our contractors, they will and do have a number of stipulations within the contracts to support us in bringing the benefits to the local area, from skills development, job opportunities, and also education for those early careers, and encouraging youth to think about all the different options within the infrastructure and the construction industry. Obviously, given where we are with the pause, there are fewer contractors that are on board. However, this is giving us time to make sure that what's set out in some of the contracts that are coming up really maximises in this area. And we still do have contractors working both on the possessions side and also in the early environmental works. So those contractors will still be delivering some of these opportunities, both from a jobs perspective and also the upskilling and education side of things. So just in terms of some of the levers and requirements that our contractors do have, there's things such as requirements on number of apprenticeship schemes that they have to support, and that's dependent on the size of their contract. They're doing a lot of work within the education system. So Balfour Beatty, for instance, I know they've recently supported two.
Could I just prompt you to move on, please? Sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, I won't go into the details of those, but there's lots of opportunities there. And in terms of the work we're doing to ensure that those opportunities and those benefits come locally, we have the job brokerage model. So we're working very closely with those partners within that, essentially using local small organisations in the area that have the specialist knowledge of communities, what people and communities have to offer, and matching those people to the jobs that we'll have available and helping those people through that channel. So that's it in terms of the sort of general update. I think my last slide was just to really reiterate as a community engagement team that we're still here, we're still available, and we'll still be talking to communities despite this pause. So it's more of a reassurance that we'll be coming out and about, and we'll still be making sure everybody has someone to talk to should they need. So that's me. So on to questions.
Thank you very much for that update. I'm taking public questions first, members, because they obviously don't have the ability to ask ancillaries, whereas it may prompt you to ask one if you so deem appropriate. So we'll go on to question 1, which was submitted by a resident of Whitmore Heath. And it reads, I reside on Whitmore Heath, which before HS2 was a very sought after area to live. I always enjoyed walking around the heath until now, with padlocked, chained up gates, empty, eerie houses, and HS2 security doing laps around the heath. I'm disgusted by how many of these houses are sat empty, many for over 6 years, which has resulted in 3 properties, which cost over £3 million being turned into cannabis plantations. Another property worth 1.4 million has been taken over by squatters, which would never have happened if these properties had been let out. Instead of renting it out, HS2 have now set up a welfare unit for their security on a neighbouring empty property, which has cost the taxpayer £1.3 million last year. Just on my walk alone, I passed properties worth over £11 million, which are all currently sat empty, with some being empty since the day they were purchased many years ago. The security alone on our road is needlessly costing the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds. If these properties had been rented out, I'm fully aware that this is a recurring story all the way along the trace, wasting millions of taxpayers' money. My question, therefore, is why aren't these properties rented out? And is there anyone even accountable for renting these properties out? Over to you, Victoria.
Yes, thank you. So yes, we do own a large number of properties along the Whitmore Heath. We actually acquired 35 properties in that area to date. 16 of those properties are currently letted out. So there's a further 19 overall that are currently not letted. However, 3 are on the open market and 5 are undergoing work on site to get them up to a lettable standard. And then the further remaining properties are being going through that governance approvals process and surveys needed to make sure that we can do the work that we need to do in order to make them lettable. There is also a natural cycle. So as soon as if someone does leave a property, we have to go and assess and do that survey work to ensure that it is at the renting standard. I think the key point really to get across is we will always let properties on, and that's done on the open market. That's our aim. We want to make sure that those properties aren't empty if we can help it. The only exception to that is where getting that property up to a lettable standard is not value for the taxpayer. So we have to balance that, which is why we undertake these surveys and go through that approvals process. So really, we're aware there's some empty properties within the Whitmore Heath area, but we are going through those chains, and those properties will be coming onto the market over the next few months as we work through the updates that are needed to take place in order to make them up to the lettable standard. In regards to the security, we do have regular patrols in the area. Based on the fact that we have properties in the region, both empty and letted properties, and that will continue to be in place. And that's something that is across the whole of the Phase 2A route, not just in Whitmore Heath area. And their activity is very much sort of intelligence led around their level of presence in the area. We have just evicted the illegal occupiers of the property at Whitmore Heath. That was a tenanted property, so it was the tenant who allowed them to move into that property, and it's taken as we've had to go through the court process to be able to go through that enforced eviction. So they have now been removed, and that property has been secured.
Thank you. Does any member have a question related to this in particular? No hands. I've got 2 follow-up questions, Victoria. The first is you've said there are still 19 properties unlet, and the local residents tell me substantively that a lot of these properties have been like that for several years and have not been let out. So we understand that if the cost to the taxpayer to do the properties up to a rentable standard is that high that you cannot rent them out, surely that can't apply to 19 properties.
No, absolutely not. So 3 of those properties are on the market currently out of that 19. 5 of them are having work done at the moment. So there'll be workers on site making those up to standard. And the further ones looking at, I've got the detailed list, which for security reasons I can't share, but that sets out that the rest are being looked at in terms of various surveys being undertaken to assess what needs to be done, cost that, and then approve that. So they're all sort of in process. I think there are a couple that won't be rentable based on their condition, but that's yet to be confirmed. But in terms of where we are, that's the latest I've been given by the team.
Thank you. And the follow-up question to that is, given what you've just updated us on, and given the size, the value and the rentable value of these properties, given that they haven't been let for such a long period, who's held accountable and who scrutinises this taxpayers' money being wasted?
So the whole the DFT we are accountable to them. So we have a property management company who manages the properties on behalf of HS2. So there's various governance and reporting that they're required to do. And again, HS2 is required to report that up to the Department for Transport. And that's where all the approvals have to go through as well for any money that we wish to spend on properties. Has to go through the various governance processes with the department. And
is that publicly available?
I'm not sure. I'll have to come back to you on what that looks like.
Okay, if you could, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we move on to questions. Sorry, Councillor Mobbin. Okay, off you go.
Thank you. So you've just informed us by answering Councillor White's questions that HS2 are managing these spaces, these properties. So question one is, how have you allowed them to become in such a state? The question put by the member of the public is heartbreaking, absolutely awful. And question two, seeing as you on your slides you put about more land possessions, how are you going to ensure that other areas aren't devastated in the same way as this area has been? Thank you.
So in terms of the status of the properties, they have been sort of maintained by HS2, but obviously on purchase, there's certain standards and rentable requirements that they need to pass, whether they were in a position to do so or whether there was work required before HS2 purchased them. That's part of this surveying process. Any land property that we purchase will be maintained. So in terms of the land possession process, that's majority sort of agricultural land, farming land, that will all be maintained by our contractors in the appropriate manner. We're still working through that maintenance programme and again looking at tenancies for the farmers as well, licenses.
I'm sorry, but it doesn't really answer the question as to how HS2 allowed the dereliction and the deterioration and the illegal possession of those properties. And I don't feel reassured in terms of sitting on a scrutiny group that subsequent land possessions won't be experiencing a similar kind of decline. So, you know, the question was, how was it allowed for these things to deteriorate in such a fashion? And what are you going to do differently to ensure that those things don't happen with subsequent purchases?
So in terms of the level of deterioration, any property that we're not renting is sort of secured and maintained in the condition that we purchase it at. The challenges in that area is why we have that security presence in the region to ensure that those properties remain secured, and the challenges we've had have all been related to tenants within those properties, and that's all part of the property management, but it's something that I can take away and look at what we have done on the back of some of the challenges that we've had.
Councillor Moffat, so I know that's not an answer that completely answers your question, but I think Victoria's saying that she's going to come back with further information, which will be shared with us. No other hands raised on question one, so we'll move on to question two, which is a lot shorter, and it is from a resident of Rhine Hill. What structure do HS2 have to ensure all people and businesses are not disadvantaged in any way by the project?
Thanks, Gary. So in terms of I suppose the structures that we have, as a project, our aim is to obviously minimise and mitigate the disruption that will result from building HS2 as much as we can, but also and we have clear guidelines that have been set as part of the hybrid build process, in which we have to follow and adhere to as part of that. However, there will be unavoidable disruption that results from building a railway. And I think it's important that we recognise that and are clear and upfront with communities about what they will see and feel during the construction of HS2. We do have various, as I said, guidelines. So the environmental statement is what sets out from the hybrid build process what the effects will be in terms of construction, both on the environment and to communities and people. And then we have the environmental minimum requirements, that is what the government have set out as their commitments and what we're required to adhere to as HS2 in terms of managing and mitigating those impacts. And we also follow, as part of that, the Code of Construction Practice, which talks about some of the ways that we will minimise the impacts, such as vibration, noise, for those communities. So there's various requirements that we have to follow and we have to report and deliver on as part of those commitments that the government have set within the environmental minimum requirements. For those directly impacted, such as landowners, we obviously have the compensation schemes. So where we're compulsorily purchasing property, we follow the compensation code so that no person is worse off from that compulsory purchase. And then we also have the discretionary property schemes to support those impacted by the scheme. And those are based on the relative level of disruption. So those who are more disruptive are within sort of property zones where they can get different levels of support and compensation as a result of that. And again, there's the community engagement team. So myself, we're here to listen to the concerns of communities, and we feed that back and act as the voice within the organisation to challenge our teams to look at ways that we can further minimise impacts that may have been raised as a concern, and try and build the new railway in the best way and the least disruptive way. I think that's probably the key points.
Thank you. Does that provoke any questions from members? No, just one from myself, and then it's a follow-up really, Victoria. You mentioned compensation payments. Now, you're well aware that myself and local councillors in the area represent and are helping a lot of landowners and farmers who have had significant swathes of land compulsory purchased by HS2 and are still waiting on compensation payments. They regularly tell us they are delayed, and we are regularly communicating, trying to get that resolved. So what is HS2 going to do different to speed up that process?
In terms of some of the challenges relate to information and evidence. So it's about making sure we communicate what we need to ensure that we can approve and sign off the claims that are coming through from the farmers' agents and that side of it. I know we're meeting next week to discuss in more detail some of the land and property challenges in the area. But essentially the compensation, there's sort of two channels. There's a compulsory purchase compensation, which comes through at that general vesting point, and people can apply for advanced compensation to support them through that if they wish to do so, which would mean that the compensation comes through at an earlier date. And then we also have the business claims. So farmers can claim retrospectively on any business losses that they may have or have resulted from HS2 work and possession or temporary possession of some of the land. So there's sort of two streams, and the key really is for farmers to engage with their agents and their agents to engage with HS2 to make sure that that communication is open and consistent, and that's something that we're working on improving. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. No other member with their hand up, so we'll move on to question 3, which is quite a long statement and question, but it's a really important one, so I will read it. In June 2018, at HS2A Select Committee, Justine Thornton KC promised on behalf of HS2 to alleviate the stressful and detrimental impact of it, making particular reference to Whitmore Heath. Also in June 2018, the same select committee asked HS2 to report on mental health and well-being. In December 22, HS2 produced a progress report, which has been tabled and circulated, and they are not living up to any of the promises made in it. In fact, they've made the situation worse. 16 residents of Whitmore Heath have died since HS2 started, all living under stress. And as Justine Thornton said, the detrimental impact of HS2. Many people are vulnerable, and yet none of the commitments within the progress report have been put in place. In fact, the situation has worsened. The residents have had to contend with empty properties, properties that have been turned into cannabis farms, and the security thereafter. Anyone wishing to sell to HS2 in this area should be allowed to do so. At present, only those who, according to HS2's need to sell rules, can do so, but even they have to jump through hoops. People are told they can apply through a typical, but still refused, adding to the stress this places upon them. People have been living with this situation since 2013, which is 10 years already, and they are now being told it will not be completed until 2041, which is another 18 years. The question is, when is HS2 going to live up to its promises to Parliament? Look after the welfare of people, because this won't just be happening in this area. Do regular face-to-face welfare checks and assist those who want to sell and move for any reason with as little fuss as possible.
Thanks, Gary. So I think to start, in terms of the commitments that were made to Parliament and the report that I know was attached to the question, we have been and have undertaken activity to deliver against these commitments. So we have a designated engagement officer for the community, and this has been in place since that report. So that was previously Becky Lewis, who some of you may know, and I have picked that up following her departure on the interim while we recruit for her replacement. So they continue to have a designated person to come to if they have any questions. In terms of visits and regular activity in the area, we have held a number of land and property surgeries in that area to support those looking to explore whether they can apply for one of the schemes to HS2 and purchasing their property. So those have been held, as well as more general drop-in sessions within the community, recognising that people like that face-to-face opportunity, and we'll also continue to do the newsletters and materials and updates that share any information about any work that is happening at least 14 days in advance of that work. So all that work is continuing, and I'd really just encourage any local residents, if they do want to come and talk to us, or they want us to come and talk to them, to reach out either directly to myself or to the HS2 help desk, which is available 24/7, and that will come through to the relevant team member, and we'll reach out to that person and organise any visits or any conversation that they might be looking for. We've also offered further support because we are conscious that it can be very difficult and stressful time for many people as a result of HS2 and the impacts. So we have a specialist support team, and we work with a charity called Power. So those that need it can get an independent advocate to support them through any process, whether that's through a property scheme, whether that's through a compulsory purchase, or whether that's through just general engagement on what's happening in the area. There's lots of forms of support that we can offer through that service. So that's something that we can offer and we can discuss with individual residents should they wish to, or should they need it. The committee report also talked about undertaking that wellbeing survey. So we are doing a study in partnership with the National Institute of Health and Care Research and Cambridge University. So that is a 10-year project where we're looking across phase 2A and phase 2B at the welfare impacts of large construction projects and what that means and how that impacts mental health and some of the stresses that people experience living along the routes of those projects. So that work is underway, and there's regular sort of reports and updates that get shared in relation to that. And then finally, the last aspect was around the schemes and the property schemes and the purchasing of the properties. We have schemes in place to support those most disruptive, but we do have to strike that fair balance between supporting those affected and also maintaining that value of money for the taxpayer. So the need to sell scheme and the atypical schemes are there to support those who have a need to sell and a reason to sell, and those are all assessed, and there is support to help people understand that process and go through that process pre-application, both from myself as the engagement lead, but also we have a pre-application service that was set up mid last year that looked for the need to sell scheme, and they can have an appointment with the need to sell people ahead of their application to talk through their case and understand more about some of the criteria that people are having to hit in order to apply.
Thank you. Does that prompt any questions, members? Councillor Fox-Hughes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that response. Obviously, reading that, it's quite harrowing, some of the experiences that people are having, and it's particularly around health and well-being, psychological, mental health, physical health. You've mentioned that you've got support officers and that you're working on a study. Does that include paid access to therapies or treatments for individuals, or do they have to rely on the National Health Service for any ill health impact of this project?
So as part of that specialist support team that we have in place within HS2, they can have those conversations and explore what support we can offer that person and what channels that would be through, whether that's through Power or some of the other support channels that we have on offer. So there are various different things that we can do dependent on the circumstances of that individual to support them. I don't know the details, but I can look into what some of those things are that they offer, because that's managed by that team. I'll come back to you on that with a bit more detail.
I think that's really important. So I'll ask the clerk to particularly note that question. And obviously we expect a response on that, please, Victoria. I mean, that prompts when you say that there is obviously resource there to go out and talk to individuals face to face, and that was part of this question that was brought up. What is that resource? Who is it? Was that Becky Lewis or is that somebody else?
So it was Becky Lewis as the engagement manager, and now it's myself while we recruit in for a new manager. And there's obviously other team members who can support as needed, and dependent on the nature of what they want to talk about, we would bring in the relevant experts as needed. So if it's a particular case about a land and property situation, or whether it's something more broadly, we can bring in the relevant people. So as the engagement team, we're that point of contact that can come out and talk to people and visit them as needed.
I thought that would be your answer, and with all due respect, you're very thinly spread, and you're not going to be able to give the community what it needs. And that's no disrespect to you. It's just the fact that you are one individual across a very wide area. So how can we escalate that within HS2 as a scrutiny committee? Because it's really important that people get the support they need from mental health well-being point of view in particular.
Yeah, so as I said, we have lost Becky from the team, and we are working through that recruitment process. I think the other side is, as work does increase and our contractors come on board, they are also required to have an engagement function. So they would be picking up some of that engagement activity if it's related to their work, and that's something that will continue. The design delivery partner that's coming, that will be coming on board at the end of the year, and they'll be progressing the scheme designs. They will also have an engagement function, but we're that overarching support of all the different sort of channels. In terms of sort of the resource at the moment, if people come out and ask for that support, then we will find a way to deliver it. But obviously, any that you're welcome to sort of raise that you'd like more support in that area if you feel that there's a need.
I don't know what members think, but I'd like to propose that we actually put an official escalation into HS2 asking for that level of support for our communities impacted. Does that have support? Yes. Okay. So we will officially do that. And as I say, it's no degradation on your ability, Victoria. It's about resource levels that we need to support our community.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's important that we can
Thank you.
support everybody.
Right, so any other questions on HS2 members? Councillor Fox-Hughes?
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. The first one regarding the community funding grant. Just forgive my ignorance on it. As I understand it, it's for areas impacted by the construction. How is that administered and defined? Is it on a definitive area from the works, or is it more arbitrary than that and wider?
So what we advise is when you're looking at the level of disruption, it's what's set out is using that environmental statement. So the environmental statement will outline where there is impact and where we need to minimise that impact and where we'll be working. So communities can use that, and that can be, there's no defined sort of area from the route, because you could be impacted by a construction route and quite far off from the line of route. So there's no boundary. It's more about demonstrating that disruption, whether that's from construction traffic or the actual sort of track of the railway.
Right. And the second question is, where does HS2 Project source its steel from? And are there any targets for the use of UK steel?
So in terms of where it's from, exactly, I don't know. I do know that 98% is a lot is from the UK, so it is UK sourced. But I can look into more detail around that and come back to you.
Thank you.
So again, we'll ask the clerk to log an answer to that question specifically, because you looked a bit surprised at that answer, Councillor Fox-Hughes. Okay. Any other members wish to ask a question? In that case, then, thank you very much, Victoria, for coming along tonight and for answering all of our questions. And obviously, we'll ask you back in the future for a further update.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So moving on to the next substantive item, which is item 6, which is a borough local plan update. I'll ask Councillor Fear to introduce this, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. See the report that's in front of you. This is the report that came to Cabinet a couple of days ago. And of course, I'd like to remind all members that there will be an all-member briefing on this matter next week. I think the invitations have now gone out for that. It'll be a virtual event to make sure that people who can't get to this room can still have a look at that. Report, I think, sets out where we are very clearly. At this juncture, I'd like to express my thanks to our team in planning, who worked very, very hard to get up to speed on this. They've done an awful lot of work. The draft local plan is supported by, I think, over 3,500 pages of evidence, which has been worked through. So this is a very, very substantial piece of work. And I think it's also been condensed in a very readable form. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to our officers who've got a presentation, which I think we can see now on the screen, just to take you through the philosophy behind this and what the next steps are.
Thank you, Councillor Fair. Good evening, members. Tonight we've got a slide pack to work through. This is going to be the same slide pack as presented to you next week at the members' briefing. So this evening, there might be certain slides we move through relatively quickly. We'll look to spend the time on them next week, if that's okay. So is it possible to go to the next slide, please, Tom? Thank you. Yeah, so tonight we're just going to cover just a bit of background about what is the local plan, current position regarding development plan at Newcastle, go into a little bit of why produce a neighbourhood plan, why produce a local plan, sorry, why now, why continue given the national context, and then some very basic overview of the draft local plan proposals and what we're going to do regarding consultation and next steps. Next slide, please, Simon. So what is a local plan? A local plan sets a long-term vision, objectives and strategy for the borough. It allocates land for development and includes policies also to assist in determining plan applications. Next slide, please, Simon. This slide just sets out factually the current development plan in the borough. So we've got the joint core spatial strategy between ourselves and Stoke-on-Trent City Council. The development plan also includes the waste plan with Staffordshire and neighbourhood development plans as well, which are listed here on this slide. Next slide, please, Simon. So why produce the local plan? There's a number of benefits because it's a difficult thing to produce. So the main benefits of having a local plan in place is support place shaping across the borough, provide certainty for communities so they have an understanding of where development will be directed over the next 15 or 20 years, help shape the settlements and meet identified needs for housing, employment, retail needs, etc. Also protects a great deal in terms of the countryside and ecological and other designations. We can use a local plan to attract investment, funding opportunities and support infrastructure provision across the borough. But it's also important in terms of supporting decision taking and providing for a minimum 5-year supply of housing. Next slide, please, Sam. Thanks. So there are tiers of planning guidance. There's a national position set out there. There's also the local position, as in the local plan, and then a very local position in terms of neighbourhood plans. We've got a brief presentation on neighbourhood plans in the next agenda item. Next slide, please, Sam. So for local plans, there's a great deal of regulation and requirements behind it. And in the main, once we've produced the document and consulted on it, we then submit that plan for inspection from an independent planning inspector. And for local plans to be able to be adopted by a council, they must pass a number of tests of soundness that are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. These are positively prepared. They're seeking to positively meet the area's development requirements. They're justified in terms of evidence behind them. They're effective in terms of being a deliverable strategy for 15 or 20 years ahead. And they're also consistent with national policy, as in what's in the National Planning Policy Framework and other advice and guidance notes as well. Next slide, please, Sam. But they also must be legally compliant in terms of meeting various legal tests, strategic environmental assessment and others. But they also, and another important legal test is that about the duty to cooperate. And that is requires us as a council and other public bodies to engage constructively and on an ongoing basis in relation for strategic cross-boundary issues between ourselves and our neighbours and other parties as well. So why produce a local plan now? The council are required to have a local plan. As outlined in a previous slide, the core strategy, last core strategy was adopted in 2009. There's a pressure to deliver more homes more generally, and a need to be able to demonstrate a 5-year supply, ongoing 5-year supply of housing need, along other things. And a local plan has a number of purposes, but one of them is to identify allocations which will support an ongoing housing land supply, but also support economic growth as well in terms of identifying land for where employment development can go. This slide just outlines, it continues the theme as to why now, in terms of there has been changes in legislation mooted, in terms of the levelling up bill that's currently working through Parliament, and we've had a consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework, but those items haven't materialised as yet. And there's a need and a clear message from government that we need to keep planning and keep working our local plans. A delay in producing a local plan will lead to a great shortfall in terms of meeting our development requirements and potentially leave the council exposed to applications on unallocated sites and more planning appeals. But also, as I outlined previously, it's not just about housing need, it's about employment sites, about economic growth and those sort of matters as well. And as outlined on the slide, failing to plan is planning to fail. In terms of 5-year supply, the council has a published figure from the 31st of March 2022 of a 7.3 years supply of deliverable housing sites. However, through the work undertaken to support this plan and also the planning appeal at a site at Baldwin's Gate for 200 units, we've identified that there's now a 4.84 years supply of housing. And that position is the position that the council's advanced during the appeal, recognising that the inspector might make further changes to that position, and we're expecting that decision in the middle of July. There are, as outlined in the slide, there's reasons for reduction in housing supply, sites have been completed, planning permissions not taken forward or lapsed, and also there's been no local plan recently to support new allocations and that ongoing supply of housing. So in the absence of a 5-year supply, there's a particular test that kicks in terms of presumption in favour of development in the National Planning Policy Framework. And so schemes, presumption applies in terms of potentially providing additional support for those schemes where there's an absence of a 5-year supply. So that illustrates again a need for us to continue with a local plan process. Local plans are not easy to produce. They've got a number of stages outlined here. So we're at the top bullet point in terms of a Regulation 18 consultation plan, the first draft plan. And then following this, prepare a final draft and consult on that plan, submit the plan for examination. Then there's an independent examination where people can get involved and with an inspector. And then there's various stages as outlined before the plan can be considered for adoption by the council. We consulted on issues in the strategic options document a couple of years ago, and the plan period is from 2020 to 2040, so 20-year plan period. And our local development scheme, and that sets out a timetable for producing a local plan. There are a number of stages as outlined on the slide, but effectively we're looking to prepare a final draft plan early next year to submit for examination, and then the timetable of examination is determined by the planning inspectorate before the examination takes place, before we then can consider adoption of a local plan by full council. Local plans are supported by evidence, as Councillor Fear illustrated earlier. We've got a number of documents supporting the local plan, approximately 3,500 to 4,000 pages of evidence-based documents that will sit alongside a local plan that residents and communities and other stakeholders can review and look to input into. In general terms, the plan identifies a minimum need for 358 homes per annum to support around 269 jobs per annum. And to support that level of jobs growth, we require a minimum of 69 hectares of employment land to be supported through the plan. The plan also identifies the potential need for strategic employment sites. Now, these are big sites, over 25 hectares in size, and we're consulting on those in terms of not showing a view on those sites at this stage, but seeking views from the public on the principle and location of those future large-scale sites in the borough. Next slide, please, Sam. The plan is also supported by a settlement hierarchy. So this sets out areas based on size in the borough. So principally, so your largest centre, Newcastle town, and secondary centre at Kidsgrove, which we're terming an urban centre, and then beneath that a number of rural centres, including Audley, Baldwinsgate, etc. Before finally, below that tier, there's other settlements and rural areas. And in broad terms, the highest levels of growth are directed towards the higher order settlements within the settlement hierarchy. In terms of a distribution of development, as outlined just, the majority of development is directed to what we would consider more sustainable centres, so the higher order centres such as Newcastle and Kidsgrove. But we also recognise that there's a level of growth required within the rural centres in order to support their vitality, their viability going forward as well. Alongside sites, employment and housing sites, the plan also includes a number of policies to help decision taking going forward. So in respect of housing, it's got a position on affordable housing, housing mix and type, density, space standards, etc. But it also has policies on green belt, retail, infrastructure, health and well-being. These are all other important areas that the local plan is seeking to emphasise and seek views on at this stage. As outlined a minute ago, we are consulting on potential strategic employment allocations, and this is supported by a piece of work that consultants Asmel Verdi have done on behalf of the council. And they've looked at 3 potential sites at Junction 16, a site in Keele and a site at Torque. And that's important to illustrate, as previously noted, we're not proposing to allocate these sites at this stage, or seeking views on the principle of those sites and on the site options themselves. We've looked at options focused within existing urban areas principally first. So we've had, as you know, we've had a brownfield call for sites late last year. We've looked at brownfield land registers, our strategic housing and employment land availability assessment, looked at sources of sites where we can look at site options within settlement first. We've looked at the allocation of brownfield sites first and then non-green belt sites before looking at greenbelt options. We've also had discussions with our neighbouring authorities to ask whether they can meet some of the council's unmet housing need. And we were only able to look at greenbelt options if we can demonstrate exceptional circumstances for greenbelt release. This slide just illustrates that we've gone through a detailed site selection methodology to identify the sites. I'm not going to dwell particularly on this, just to note that we're at stage 6, so we're public consultation and input from statutory consultees, and also to illustrate we haven't reached a final stage yet, so that'll be informed by consultation responses and other evidence. And just to illustrate that our site selection process has been informed by lots of evidence as set out previously. So we've got the issues and options responses and our strategic housing, employment, land availability assessment and other evidence on infrastructure and other matters. We've assessed approximately 141 sites, and there's a split outline there in terms of the type of sites that we've looked at. And if we move on to the next slide, we're proposing to allocate 42 sites, including an employment site, mixed use site, and 40 sites for residential use. And we're also consulting as outlined on the 3 strategic locations. In terms of next steps, as mentioned, a cabinet report was considered on the 6th of June. We're hoping to start an 8-week public consultation starting on the 19th of June to the 14th of August. We'll then review consultation responses received, undertake any further evidence base generated by consultation and other matters that we identify. We then prepare and consult on the final draft plan called Regulation 19 plan. And that plan will need to be considered at full council before going out for a period of representations and then submitted for examination before it can be considered by adoption again at full council. This table is taken from our statement of community involvement, which sets out how we will consult on our local plan. So we're on the second column at the moment, so that draft local plan. So it involves duty to cooperate discussions, publishing documents, leaflets, site notices, etc. So we'll be looking to undertake and meet those requirements during the consultation. This slide just illustrates how we're showing the policies. So the policy approach we've got a policy largely in boxes in the local plan, and then we've got supporting information and any relevant evidence underneath it. And then in terms of how to respond to the consultation, we've got consultation pages accessed from the 19th of June at /local plan, that website address shown on the slide. We'll receive comments via the consultation portal, via post to this address, or via email, and those details will be clearly advertised. We've got a number of consultation events held across the borough during the consultation period. And just finally, we would encourage responses on the local plan to influence the future direction of the plan in a constructive way. Thank you.
Thank you. So members will have had access to the full report last week, so you should have had ample opportunity to have read it and come up with appropriate questions, I hope. So I'll now open the floor for those said questions. Councillor Gorton.
Thank you, Chair. Didn't expect to be first out of the starting blocks, actually, but there you go. First of all, I think let's begin by acknowledging the work that's been done, and also acknowledging the fact that from reading the draft local plan, there are certainly things in there that I approve of and I think are strong. But I also think it's true, if we were honest, to admit that so far members have had a limited opportunity to feed into the local plan. And I must say I was a bit disappointed, because I thought we had a minute to that effect from the Scrutiny Committee that we would get some sort of briefing before the plan actually went live. Now, my understanding is that the plan went live at the cabinet before the cabinet meeting, and you could click on the plan by just going through the links. And I think it was unfortunate that we didn't have an opportunity before that document went into the public domain to give our views and to express an opinion. Now, I imagine that when the final document leaves the authority and goes to the planning inspector, one of the issues that the inspector will want to look at and satisfy him or herself on is the extent to which there has been member scrutiny and involvement. So my first question, Chair, really is that what are the arrangements for scrutinising the draft plan once the consultation has ended? I do have other questions, but I know it would be courteous, I think, to let other members have a chance. So if I could, that's my first sort of go at it, as it were.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll state the obvious to start with, and that is that this is a regular standing item on every scrutiny committee. Now, and then I'll hand over, is it Councillor Fair or the officers to take the substantive part of that?
I think, as we've seen from the presentation, there will be an opportunity for scrutiny of what would, in techno terms, will be called the Reg 19 plan. In other words, when we've had the consultation period for this, our officers will gather together all of that consultation material. And again, I'd like to stress here, because last time with issues and options, there were a lot of rumours going out there that people could only use the portal. That's just not true. You can write in, you can email in, and I think it's important for all of us to communicate that. We want as much feedback as we can on all of this. And if you don't like the portal, please write in, that's fine. But maybe I could pass over to our officers just to talk through what happens at Reg 19 at that juncture.
Thank you, Councillor Fair. Yeah, just emphasise as well that this is a draft, so you're perfectly entitled to write any representations to us during this consultation stage, and we'd be grateful to receive any views. In terms of the next stage, it becomes a bit more formalised in terms of once you publish the Regulation 19 document, we're then seeking representations on the plan. We package all that up and send it on to the planning inspectorate. But before then, in terms of seeking permission to submit the plan for examination, that decision will be taken by full council. So members would have an opportunity at that stage to get involved. And as we work through the plan, we're always listening. So if there is opportunities through this group or any other for member engagement, then we'll be open to that.
I think just 2 points on that. One is, well, first of all, a question: when does the public consultation finish, please? And we will have the results of that.
The consultation ends on the 14th of August. So it'll take us some time to process the responses received. So I'd say a couple of months after that.
Okay, because I'm just thinking about our next regular committee, which is actually in the middle of September. So you won't be ready at that point.
We'll have a sense of how many responses received and be able to pull out the key themes. But in terms of producing a full consultation report, we'll do our best to try and meet that. But it might be challenging to meet that. But we'll be able to pull out the key themes that residents have set forward to us.
Okay, so just 1 point to bear in mind: the September scrutiny committee is actually quite light on agenda items, so we can make this the main one for that evening, and that will certainly allow members the opportunity to gather where officers are up to and question at that point. And then we can take, I suppose, a step back and decide, is that substantive enough? And at that point, decide next steps. Do you have any follow-up questions to that, Councillor Gorton, or do you want to move on to your second question?
If I could just move on to a second question, Chair, it's very much in line with the consultation arrangements. I mean, I note the public events that have been published in the document, and I can understand why those events are being held, because they obviously align with the sites that have been identified. As someone who lives in Maybank and represents the Woolstanton ward, I was a little disappointed that there were no public events planned for the Woolstanton, Huge Bradwell area, Maybank, Court Hill. Sure, there are members of communities there that would have quite a lot to say on the future development of the borough. Just wonder, is there any opportunity for some sort of public event in that locality?
That's a good question, Councillor. I suppose that can be further put as to why and who decides on the locations. That would be quite interesting. Don't know who wants to take that. Councillor Fick.
I'm happy to respond to that, saying, as the councillor rightly says, I mean, we have chosen the public consultation areas where we feel that this plan will generate most interest at the end of the day. We will also have an event here in the centre of town. I remember that this committee, in fact, raised that as a matter at the last consultation at Issues and Options, and we went ahead and we put in an extra meeting, which we will have this time as well in the centre of town. I'm sure that we can look into whether there's a need for an extra one up in the Woolstanton, Maybank area. And thanks for that feedback. We'll certainly take that on board.
Thank you, Councillor. I do think that is important, and I think I'd ask if any other members feel underrepresented in their respective areas, then please contact Councillor Fair directly and raise that concern, because we do need to be sure that the consultation with the public is thorough. Do you have any further questions, Councillor Gordon?
Just a couple of quick observations, if I may, Chair, just on the report. It's a long document. I've been through it twice. I may well have missed things, but there's a couple of things that sort of stuck out, shouted out to me. One was about 106, and I was hoping to read perhaps a much more sort of robust statement on 106, in the context that this authority would offer a really strong steer to developers that really we can't countenance, you know, the renegotiation of agreements entered into with the authority. I mean, I've only been on the planning committee for just over a year, and I can remember a couple of occasions where, you know, developers are coming forward saying, can we change this? And of course, it's always in their favour. So I was hoping that maybe in the draft local plan, there could be a much stronger statement on that. And the other thing is, I liked a lot of the language around health and well-being, but I did notice that the commitments, the sort of actions, seem to focus on takeaway hot food shops. And I thought maybe there are other aspects of health and well-being that we should address in the plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fair.
Well, again, I'd like to thank the council. I mean, these are precisely the sorts of comments we want in the feedback for the draft local plan. So we've got those now. I'm sure our clerks made a note of those, but that's the sort of thing that I would encourage people to say and give feedback. The more feedback we have, the happier we'll be. That will, of course, have a knock-on effect. I should say this, Mr. Chairman, that, of course, it will mean that our officers will have more work, and therefore there will be less things they'll be able to present at the September meeting, but that would, in fact, will be a judgment of the success of the consultation in a way.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Gordon? Thank you. Councillor Panther.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points. Firstly, in regard to the presentation, you say it's going to be done on next week. Are there going to be any paper copies for the councillors and the public to study beforehand? Secondly, the second matter is a matter of constructive criticism and nothing more than that. On my ward in particular, I noticed you mention the need for 500 houses, and yet there's absolutely no measures taken whatsoever to generate any further employment sources for the people that are supposed to be living there.
Thank you. Councillor Fair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the councillor note in the presentation that the local plan is indeed looking at employment sites as well as housing sites. So those two things are running in tandem. The important thing about local plan is that I think it's incumbent on all of us not to present this as just a plan which drops houses on people where they don't want them. A lot of this is about protecting the borough, about making sure that development goes where we want it to go. Again, if we look at those slides, you can see that if we don't fulfill some of these criteria, paragraph 11D, the presumption for sustainable development, means in fact that pretty much it's open season. So it is very important for us to engage with that, but employment is definitely there. Obviously, we want to produce high quality jobs for the borough, and part of the plan's aims is to do precisely that. As regards other material, I think because we don't like to produce vast amounts of paper, this material, this is public meeting after all, so this plan is in front of you here. You can print this off if you want to. I'm sure if members of the public requested the slides that will come to members later on, some provision can be made in some shape or form. But as I say, I think the move from the council to move towards paperless agendas is the right way to go. It saves us an awful lot. It saves an awful lot of paper, which is a good thing. So I think on request, if a case is made, we can do it. But otherwise, I don't want to see us awash with paper, especially not 4,000 pages worth of evidence.
Do you have a secondary question, Councillor Panther?
No, that's it, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fox-Hewitt?
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. 2 of them are hopefully short. The first one is, we essentially consulted residents asking them on the number of houses and the spatial strategy that they would support or that they thought appropriate for the borough. Of course, they were in response to and predicated on statutory housing targets, as we're all aware. And as you're aware, those targets have now been removed. So the question is, how have residents, how is the consultation and the plan responded to that, and how are residents going to be consulted on whether they still think those targets were appropriate for the borough and the development?
Thank you. Councillor Fear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I looked to my officers for correction, but I believe the council is mistaken. There have been ideas muted that these targets will be taken away, but these targets are still in place. We don't know when the results of any consultations the MPPF is going to come out. So at the moment, we are as we are. And very strong advice from government is that we are to continue with that assumption. As has been seen from the presentation, if we don't fulfill those criteria, we are at high risk, not in the future, we are at high risk now of having development in places we don't want. We will lose democratic control of the process. As regards issues and options, certainly cognizance has been taken of that, because in fact, all of this report is predicated on the low growth figures. Now, you recall issues and options actually presented a series of options for growth. People said we prefer the lower one. That is what this has been predicated on. Indeed, work did not start upon this document until that had been made absolutely clear, and we worked in that way. But if I just look to my officers, our officers, I should say, mustn't be possessive about these things, just to make sure that I'm right about what I've said about housing targets.
Got nothing to add. No, other than to say that the plan presents a position that is reflective of the standard method, which is a calculation that the government expects councils to utilise.
Councillor Fox-Hewitt?
Yeah, just on that, I may be of the erroneous understanding that on the 6th of December 2022, the government announced a change from statutory housing targets to advisory guidance.
The statement was made, but in terms of the national planning policy framework, which this plan is based upon, there's still an expectation that councils use the standard method unless there's exceptional circumstances that demonstrate otherwise. Obviously, that position will be tested through consultation on this document. Will reflect on that position if the situation changes and additional planning guidance is issued by the government for the next stage of the local plan.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I won't labour that point, other than 30 authorities have revised the plans following that announcement. So if we're awaiting further guidance, then we're awaiting that guidance. The second question is response really to what Councillor Gorton said, particularly concerning section 106 monies. Under the monitoring framework of the document, page 89, one of the indicators, which is IR2, seems to suggest that should housing not be delivered within the expected trajectory, the proposed action would be to review the section 106 agreements. So the question is, what assurance can we have that in doing so, the positive requirements of this plan on social housing, community projects and infrastructure would be delivered?
Thank you. Councillor Fear?
Well, again, I think the councillor points to something which is, well, we've got it banked now, but again, these are precisely the things that why this is a draft plan, such like. Again, I look to our officers. My suspicion is that always when these things happen, it will be the developer's right to seek a renegotiation. I don't know whether it would be appropriate for us to have a policy in writing to say what our action will be, given that legal cases are taken on a one-for-one basis. But I just look to our officers perhaps to give some clarification on that.
There may be circumstances where a development there are justifiable reasons why there's a review of the Section 106 or other agreements. In terms of the plan itself, it should be read as a package, really. So we've got the IR2 site allocation delivery indicator, but then we've also got an indicator further down relating to IR4, which is infrastructure delivery planned, and that's supported by something called an infrastructure delivery plan, which we're going to publish an interim document at this stage, but we'll look to build on for the final stage. The infrastructure delivery plan outlines all the infrastructure required to support the local plan proposals, and that will be a key document in terms of us negotiating Section 106 and other agreements going forward once the plan's adopted.
Thank you for that response. I guess my concern would be, do we really want to be spelling out loopholes to developers in the plan? I don't see why we would do that. You know, if there's obviously statutory processes that they can go through, I wouldn't really advertise that fact in the plan. The last question is a simple one. I was contacted by a resident that said, why is the local plan not easy to find? They're having to go through several pages of scrolling and links to access the plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fear.
As far as I know, the link is fairly accessible. Again, we can talk to our IT people, and if we can get it on the front screen, I will be happy to do that. So I take that on board, and thanks for those thoughts, Councillor.
If I can just come in, and the links at the moment are through the cabinet papers, but once the consultation goes live on the 19th, there'll be a dedicated local plan link from the website, so it'll be a lot easier. This is we're not actually in the consultation period yet. We've released the plan for cabinet purposes to allow us to begin the consultation, but once it goes live on the 19th, it will be much easier to locate on the website.
And I suffer with the same scenario that I think a lot of members of the public do. We do have link after link after link on our websites. So will we only have the one for this? We will. Good. That's good to hear. Thank you. Any other members? Yes, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. The local plan was a unique opportunity to revise the illogical open space policy. Under the current policy, accessibility to open space is assessed by taking all of the open green space in the borough by type and dividing this by population. This is illogical as it weights the green space adjacent to someone's property the same as green space at the other end of the borough. Why did the local plan not consider a place-based approach to availability of open spaces?
Thank you. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the local plan has done a good job actually on defending green space in this borough, and indeed the whole point of this in many ways is to make sure that key areas of the borough are ring fenced and will not be developed on. That again is one of the great dangers of not having a local plan, is that we fall foul of this paragraph in the NPPF. So in that respect, I think the draft plan is doing the sort of things the councillor wants it to do. Again, this is some of the stuff that we can go into a feedback into the plan. These are the sorts of things we want consultation for. That's why we're going out to consultation and going out for a long period of consultation. Again, I don't know if our officers have anything to add about the methodology.
No, other than to add that we've taken advice on this in terms of open space and green infrastructure strategy that's been produced, that's listed as a related document to the policy, and consultants have advised us on our position based on the guidance in national planning policy.
Do you have any follow-up question, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members wish to speak? Councillor Grocott.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, a lot of it's been actually mentioned by Councillor Gorton and Councillor Fox-Hewitt. As you know, we have a task scrutiny for social housing. And I think my main concern is obviously new social housing is obviously fantastic and the plan is quite bold. But I just feel that we need to ensure that we are going to meet targets to ensure that we're actually driving the standards forward. And a lot of the residents in Chester have also asked about 106, but I think that's already been mentioned, so we won't go over old hat there. So it's just a kind of how are we going to guarantee that those standards are going to be driven forward? What the standards are going to be by the actual providers? And also on top of that, just as a actual afterthought as well, just obviously as a Kersrow Town Councillor, as well, the parish actual clerk had to get information to myself. So it's not just Kersrow, but all parish councillors and clerks. Should we not be trying to engage with them as well to bring it forward for the residents of their various regions?
Are you talking specifically of this consultation?
Yes, for the local plan.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was on to Hanny and she hadn't actually had the link, so I actually sent it myself because you weren't aware from the cabinet. So I think that would be a good thing, because obviously that can then open up in Kersrow and different sort of areas as well.
Sure, I think I can answer that anyway, and that is, it's already been answered that it doesn't go public until the 19th, at which point.
Yeah, but obviously you just want to make certain that the clerks are actually party to this information going forward. Okay.
Which will be sent, so.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
And
Thanks, Chair.
just to clarify, on the standards, what standards specifically are you referring to, please?
Yeah, I mean, standards and basically the kind of materials they're building with to make sure they come up to environmental standards and all that kind of stuff as well, where we can do, that we can scrutinise that kind of stuff going forward for the task section that we've set up. So that's what I'm thinking of there.
Okay.
Obviously, we don't want to have any substandard stuff that we're going to have problems with going forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Fear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. No, it's sensible stuff. Quite a lot of that is built in, I think, to the draft local plan, stuff about percentages of affordable housing and such like. And of course, the best way to make sure that happens is to get the local plan in place. Yeah, so it can't, we've got a document we can push back at developers and say, this is our plan. This is what we want our borough to be like. If you want to come and contribute to our borough, you're going to do it on our terms. Thank you very much. Yep. So that's, I think, very, very important in that regard. Once again, if you look through those sections, and I do, I really do, hats off to the officers. I think this is a very accessible document when you look at it. The policies are in those nice little boxes. If you think there should be something else in the little box, or somebody in your ward who thinks there should be something else in the little box, now is the time to send in those comments so that they get processed for the next stage of the draft. Yep.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Fear. Thank you.
Thank you. And just so the clerk has got hold of that bit of information, we will minute that this will be sent, the link will be sent out to all town and parish councils. Thank you. Any other member wish to ask a question? Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a number of questions, but first of all, I'd just like to say a huge thank you for putting the draft together. It's an exciting time for Newcastle, and that's why it's so important that we get things right and we make sure that as many voices are engaged with and as many concerns are addressed and listened to. So saying that, I just want to pick back up on what Councillor Fox-Hewitt was saying about the housing needs assessment. I do know that there is a government formula, but I'm also aware that a number of parish councils and a number of residents have expressed in various ways to the council that we revisit the housing needs assessment for a number of reasons. I accept what you're saying about the flexibility that had been offered by the then Secretary of State, but also we have got different demographics. The census indicated that rather than populations rising, particularly around here, they were not. And I'm wondering why, when a significant number of residents came to the council with a petition which was signed off on the 28th of March, why that petition still hasn't been heard. And what I understand, watching the cabinet meeting, is that the leader of the council said that it wasn't going to be heard until July. And also there was a suggestion that the petition was to try and stop the local plan, which it absolutely isn't. It's an attempt to enhance and make sure that the local plan is fit for purpose and beneficial to all of the communities across Newcastle. So can I have that question answered first? Because I know that it's caused a huge amount of concern demographics have changed. There was a suggestion that housing needs assessment could be redone. This isn't about stopping the local plan, but it is about listening to concerns. Why, when it was ready in 28th of March, why is that not being received? And why is it being described by the leader of the council as an attempt to stop the local plan from happening, which I really want it to be put on record that this is absolutely not about stopping the local plan. It's about making it work.
Thank you. Which of that particular question, which of our cabinet members wish to speak on this one?
Oh, I'm happy to speak to that, Mr. Chairman. I think the view, we can all have our views on all sorts of things, and I'm sure the leader of the council will be more than happy to defend his point of view in that regard. One thing that is the case, though, of course, and this is where I draw all members' attention to section 5 of this report. We are at risk from development where we don't want it now. The longer this process goes on, the longer that risk is. As you can see from paragraph 5.3, it is the risk of not having an available supply is therefore a high risk. In other words, we have a high risk at this juncture. It isn't the case, as our officer has confirmed, that we have had further advice about the housing figures. The housing figures that we have are the ones that we have to operate with. We could all sorts of legislation could change tomorrow. Heaven forfend, next year we may even have a socialist government. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But nonetheless, if it does, of course, we may have to push those housing targets upwards, because that seems to be what the current leader of the opposition is implying in his speeches. But that's not where we are today. We have to deal with where we are today. Tomorrow, we will deal with when tomorrow comes, because otherwise, I could plan about, I think, well, I'll do nothing. I won't repair my house at all because I might win the lottery next week and then I can buy a new house. But, it might not happen. So I get on with repairing my house. So I'm afraid that's what I'd say. I think by not progressing, we are harming ourselves. We are running against strong government advice. And therefore, I make no apologies for saying I think that going forward with this process is the correct thing to do. As regards the material of the petition, I genuinely don't know the rationale. That's something I think our legal team can talk about when these things are presented. And I would not wish to comment on that at this moment.
So we can't get an answer to that specific question in this meeting. It may be quicker if you maybe ask your group leader to write directly to the leader of the council, asking for an answer on that specifically, and he'll give that in writing, I'm sure. Okay.
So I have a couple of other questions. I'm sorry for me kind of referring here because I think it's important that I get them correct. So my second question is that the evidence shows there is already in the borough has already met the required 49.9 hectares. With existing sites allocated for employment land, and that's in Appendix 2, the draft local plan. This already exceeds the amount required for growth option 1, housing and employment, to support 7,000 houses, which only requires 46.8 hectares. So therefore, why are we looking to go well in excess of this by including a further 153 hectares of green belts, of which would provide 118 hectares of indicative employment land, in addition to the required amount needed for the growth scenario of 7,000 houses as portrayed in the issues and options document?
Thank you. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think if I may, I'll hand over to our officers here because this is a somewhat technical issue about employment land and strategic employment land. But I'm sure the council would agree with me that what we need to do in this borough is provide the best quality employment we can for the people of this borough. And that is what the plan is intending to try and do. But if I could hand over, please, I'd be grateful.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Just say in terms of the plan itself is supported by a number of evidence-based documents. One is the housing and economic needs assessment, and what that has done is it's looked at a number of options for growth, including the standard method option advised by government, and then look to ensure there's a balance between both economic and housing growth in the borough. And that's where the 69 hectares of employment land has been generated. As you quite rightly said, we've looked to secure 50 hectares of that employment land through existing supply, and that's noted in the appendix. But then there is that gap between what's provided for by our supply and what we need to find by the end of the planned period. And then alongside that document, we've had a strategic employment sites assessment done by consultant Aspinall Verdi, and that's looked at market factors and other factors that may determine the need for a more strategic level employment site to be delivered in the borough. The position the council's outlined is it's going to present that evidence during the consultation, but it's not come to a view yet in terms of the principle of and the location of whether those strategic sites are in the borough. So we're being open and transparent about that, and we're seeking views on that approach during the consultation.
Does that answer that question, Councillor Moffat?
It partly answers it. Of course, there are kind of huge concerns about those sites that have been identified and exactly what the benefit would be. And I'd just like to seek some reassurance that these are not fixed deals at the moment, particularly the AB2 site. Is this?
As outlined by Sol, this is genuinely a consultation. This is a first draft of the local plan, so we are seeking views at this stage on all the proposals in the plan.
Right. Thank you. There is a really long technical question again, which I don't know whether it would be beneficial to ask at this point, because but it does need to be asked, and perhaps some further point in the consultation might give us a chance to ask it in a bit more detail. I might submit it as a written question, if that's okay.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that, Councillor, and that is
Yeah.
please submit it in writing, and we'll get it through to portfolio holder and officers to answer.
Yeah, but there is one question. I think this is a really important question, actually. Why are we consulting during the summer holidays? When this is a time when least number of people are likely to be able to respond. And it just reminds me a little bit of the issue that we have of having the first phase consultation during that kind of Christmas period as well.
Okay.
And, you know, I mean, we did extend the first phase because of the low take up. Have we got any? Yeah. Have we got any plans to do that? Because it's incredibly important that we do much, much better than the percentage of reach that we managed last time.
Thank you. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I clearly don't move in the same circles as the councillor, because I don't know anyone who takes 2 months off for a holiday. We've got 8 weeks here. 8 weeks is a long time. It's 2 weeks more than the government require us to do. So we're over what legislation requires. And not a lot, some of this, the school holidays, the summer holidays are not now, are they? And people who take them now will be back in August. So I think 8 weeks is it's 2 months after all. If you care about something, you will find some time in 2 months to read and respond to this document. And we can construct any number of things about any period of time. So the councillor has already mentioned Christmas. That's not a good time. Summer's not a good time. I'm sure we can find a reason why spring is not a good time. So I think that, in fact, we've got a good long consultation period. We've got a very wide range of ways people can respond. I would urge everyone to tell people to respond. I agree entirely with the council. This is a very, very important document. Also, I'd like to assure the councillor again that people will be listened to. This is a genuine consultation. Again, section 213 in the report makes that entirely clear. The call for sites is still open for sites to be submitted for consideration in the next stage of the local plan. So it's not the case that this is a done deal in any aspect of it. At the same time, I would draw members' attention to the fact that if you're going to make an alternative, try and make it a a constructive alternative which actually engages with the process. Just saying I don't like this is not awfully helpful. It's a little bit like going out to play football and suggesting that actually we should all be playing rugby. There are certain rules out there and we need to conform to those rules. They're not rules of our own making. They're rules which are there for everyone in the country. But beyond that, this is a genuine consultation. You can write in if you want. You don't have to use the portal. Perhaps I should say this now, I'll say it again next week, I think for the all members brief is, I'm sure many members here have had the frustration of writing into computers and then finding that the computer system doesn't work. We are checking that system now to make sure it does work, but my strong advice to anyone would be write it out on a word processor first and then cut and paste it into the portal so that you don't lose your ideas in that respect. But I am happy with the consultation period. I think it's fine where it is. I think the means of consultation are okay. So in that respect, I want to defend the policy.
Thank you. That was a full answer. Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Moffat?
It's not quite as technical as the one that I'll put in writing, but it's quite technical, so I need to take my time. So the key points in policies HOU 1, 1N2, SE5 and SE6 mitigate against the selection of LW53. No demand for social rented housing, and it's exceptionally poor public transport, fragmentation of wildlife corridors and protected species such as bats. There's an impact on designated heritage asset setting and grade 2 listed buildings. These are key policy points. These are big issues that they're proposing to change. It'll change the village envelope, and this I'm talking about loggerheads really, which is subject of a current planning application that has over 400 objections. Why is this? Why are the concerns, 400 concerns, not being taken into consideration here?
Thank you, Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I think our officers will confirm that there's been a rigorous set of criteria used to put forward the sites that have been suggested. And again, remember, it's a suggestion, nothing else. What the councillor seems to have done, I think, is to present a series, as she sees it, of objections to one of these sites. This is precisely the sort of thing that should be in the feedback for the consultation.
Thank you. Have you exhausted your questions, Councillor Moffat?
For now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. I love substituting at committees. It gives me an opportunity that I otherwise wouldn't have to make myself unpopular with literally everyone. Our officer's presentation at the start contained a slide which filled me with dismay. The title of the slide was "Why Now?" And I have to say, everybody knows this, but I'm going to say it anyway. We are living in the long now. There are children I know in secondary school who were not born when we started this process of working towards adopting a local plan. I've been on this council for 12 years and for 0 days of my terms of office have we had a full, complete, up-to-date local plan. So I'm delighted, in a sense, that we've got this consultation going forward. I was very enthusiastic for the last one. I've said enthusiastic things at full council about getting on with this process in the high quality way that I know we are doing it, but I can only say that we should go as hard and as fast as we can on getting through this process to deliver the outcomes that I know lots of our residents want. A couple of councillors tonight have raised what they've termed technical concerns. If I can touch briefly on the housing targets. Now, whether those are a statutory target or whether they are advisory guidance, we, in this document, in the consultation as an authority, we are looking at the statutory as it was target. We're looking at what is quite a low target. It's been described by the portfolio tonight as the low target. The only possible reason why we might want to revise and delay and extend this process is to take a low target and make it any lower, even lower. There is no reason why Labour councillors would be sitting here tonight suggesting that, if at the heart of their concerns was not a desire to rip some housing out of this proposal. And if somebody here tonight wants to be the unpopular voice of let's have lots of lovely houses, it's going to be me, because people who oppose this local plan process hate the economic growth of this borough. They hate the future life opportunities of children, the next generation, and they love greedy corporations who want to build houses in locations of their choosing, in the amount of their choosing, and to a quality and a design that I don't necessarily like at all. That is the consequence of not having a local plan, as has been stated by the portfolio holder tonight, is that we're in, we're in hock to these corporations that decide they want to build houses, and they get away with it. Time after time, stuff is imposed on us in places that we would not otherwise choose. So I'm an extremely enthusiastic supporter of the process. And I'd conclude, I think, by suggesting that councillors who talk about tinkering around with the housing targets that are included in this process are at wild odds with the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Labour Party, who has plainly stated and was delighted that it appeared on the front page of several national newspapers that they were going to build on the green belt, which horrifies me. So the Labour Party's policy, I'm afraid to say, is a free-for-all on our green spaces locally. And I understand. So I'm a councillor. I'm a rational human being. I am lucky, perhaps, in that I don't have a parish that covers the ward that I represent, but I'm not soft in the head. I know how these things work. Typically, in this process, we invite people to say, okay, if you don't like what's proposed, if you don't like what's in the draft, suggest something constructive, a constructive alternative. And instead of suggesting that we build the houses elsewhere, which makes you sound like a NIMBY, and let's face it, a lot of those sorts of objections we get are NIMBY type objections, a more evolved sensibility says, hang on, if we can justify having fewer houses, let's do that. Let's have fewer houses. And then oddly enough, the ones that we don't build are the ones that are quite close to where I live, or they're quite close to the parish that I represent. And my concern, if I can put it to everyone here tonight, is that if we all do that, we all go away and we all find reasons why we need to chip away at our housing targets, we're going to end up with no growth. We're going to end up with nowhere for people to live. I think any councillor who owns their own home should check their privilege, because if we don't build houses, house building is at its lowest level that it's been in 15 years. If we don't build houses, we won't have a future. Our children won't have anywhere to live. It'll be very, very difficult for our borough to enjoy the growth. This is the Economic Growth Scrutiny Committee. We're not, we need to adopt a policy that supports that. I'm rambling now, and I think I've probably insulted everyone other than the press, who I'm sure will misrepresent horribly what I've said. So there we go. I'm complete. Thank you, Chair.
I don't think there was actually a question there, Councillor Holland. But I can see Councillor Fear is poised, so I'll let him come in.
Well, I'd follow that, as one says. I mean, I have to violently disagree with the councillor, though. I mean, he said he was going to upset everyone. I'm not upset. I thought that there was going to be a punchline in conclusion, but in fact there wasn't. So I'm afraid, Councillor Holland, you have failed.
Councillor Moffat.
Thanks, Chair. Number one, oops.
Nope.
I know that in a previous meeting where there was a call-in, Chair, you very rightly reminded us that the Scrutiny Committee is non-partisan. This is not a political committee. I haven't heard any of the councillor today mention any particular stance about party positions. And I'd prefer for it to stay that way. I think that we all of us stand for our wards with the best possible desire to do the best job in representing them. And what I would like to say, and I will put a question mark on the end of it, just so I'm not just making a statement. Just answering, well, it wasn't a question, just referring back to what Councillor Holland said, I agree that not wanting to be aspirational for the borough not wanting to have a future for our children and place for them to live is an appalling position to take. And I certainly don't do that. And there's nobody that I know, including the people who put the petition together, and I don't know all 1,500 plus signatories of it, but I know that their ambition isn't to prevent the future liveliness and aspiration of the borough. And I just want to read just a little bit of it. It said, we believe that the review should take into consideration the most up-to-date population and demographics. We believe that the approach should be part of a genuinely community-led, green and regenerative local plan. That isn't saying stop the local plan. That is asking for an approach which is aspirational, which is not looking at warehouse jobs and 0-hour contracts and low aspirations. It's recognising the importance of this process and making sure that we get it right, not just for today, but for the future of the borough. And my question is there anything wrong with that aspiration? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And you're quite right to point out that this isn't a political situation, and scrutiny should be bipartisan. So thank you for reminding me, and I would ask Councillor Holland not to make those references in the future. But I will ask Councillor Fear to answer that question, please.
Everyone is entitled to their point of view. And it's going to be difficult at this point, isn't it? Particularly if you, Mr. Chairman, want us not to be political in such, because any formal statement with rhetoric is bound to be political at some level. So here, I think we simply have points of disagreement. That's why we have democracy. That's why we have debates. In that respect, I'm sure both councillors will be able to defend their position. No doubt both councillors will make representations about this plan, and that's the way it should be.
Thank you. So the way in which we're now finishing this particular section is not particularly productive. I think the first 90% of it was, and I'd ask for it to be kept in that vein, please. So Councillor Fox-Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I quite agree. One question is, in response to a number of questions tonight, the response has been that a number of pieces of information that we've spoke about will be presented throughout the course of the consultation. The concern is there, are we not setting ourselves up to fail if that information isn't accompanying ready for the go live date? We shouldn't be entering and seeking people's views when the information isn't all available. So I'd just be cognizant of that fact. I'll just quickly say, I think Councillor Fear was unfairly dismissive of a response in his response to a question from Councillor Moffat around the timing. It's a valid concern. I think the point is anyone or many people that juggle work and childcare during a very problematic period for many of us, which is the school holidays, will attest, it is incredibly hard work to maintain employment and look after the kids. And I think it would be reasonable to ask, could a period of time span school holidays and non-school holidays? And I don't think we need to be unfairly dismissive of a valid question. The major question I've got, Chair, is what is the hierarchy of burden on the authority's decision making? Is it meeting the targets in the plan with regard to housing, or is it conforming to policies? Because I'm particularly interested if it arises that both become at loggerheads. So a housing development which forms part crucially an intrinsic link to the target, or a policy that we've got, for example, green open spaces, clean air strategy, biodiversity and habitat. What takes primacy in the decision making at that point?
Okay, thank you,
Chair.
Councillor Fear.
Well, I don't think I'm being remotely dismissive to pick up the phone, Councillor Surstwright. As far as I'm aware, summer holidays schools have not started yet. And I will reiterate, most people do not take 2 months holiday. So I think 2 months for a consultation is a more than adequate period. In fact, certainly that seems to be the government's point of view, because the government's statutory requirement is only 6 weeks. As regards other things, I think the policies in the plan are meant to be of equal weight, but the key, of course, for us has always been when it comes to, I'm sure all of us here have had this things from ward members, issues of development and such like, the housing supply numbers if we do not demonstrate the 5-year rolling supply of housing, we are open to the presumption, as it's called, of sustainable development as outlined in the MPPF. And that, as you can see from the document, is adjudged to be a high risk. And that is, in my opinion, the reason why we need to progress this and progress it as soon as possible.
Any follow-up question, councillor? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, just to confirm, on the 19th on go live date, there will be the consultation page, and on our evidence page, there will be all the documents which support the local plan. So it won't be the case, sorry if that impression was given, that it'd be direct read. All the documents will be available on the 19th.
Thank you. So I think we need to move on now. I'm not seeing anybody else rearing to ask questions. So we will move on to item 7, which is the neighbourhood planning update, which will be introduced by Councillor Fair.
Once again, obviously these things sit there in the planning hierarchy. Again, I think the hierarchy of this is important for people to understand. And again, I'd like to hand over to our officer who has got a brief presentation to get members up to speed.
Thank you, Councillor Fair. Just a short presentation just to give a bit of background on neighbourhood planning, just to assist this process. So in basic terms, what is, and apologies if you may already be aware of all this, is just to provide a short recap. So a neighbourhood plan is a community-led plan giving local people, residents, communities the power to prepare a planning document and form part of the development plan. It enables them to have a shared vision for their area and shape the development in terms of design and allocations and other things. It's developed primarily by parish council, but there are provisions for neighbourhood forums to become appropriate groups to prepare a neighbourhood plan. And a neighbourhood plan must do certain things or fulfil basic conditions, as it's called. So it should be in conformity with the policies in the local plan, contribute towards sustainable development, have regard to national policies, and as these are outlined on the slide. And the neighbourhood plan is subject to an examination process as well. So in broad terms, we've for the purposes of the presentation, we've split the process of preparing or steps to produce a neighbourhood plan into 3 different stages. So, and a lot of these stages are primarily led by local communities preparing the plan. So stage 1 is around getting established, stage 2 about preparing the plan, and stage 3 about bringing the plan into force. If you can go on to the next slide, please, Simon, thanks. So the role of the council must take decisions at key stages in the neighbourhood planning process within specified time limits and provide advice and assistance to an appropriate body preparing the neighbourhood plan. This council in 2017 took a report and confirmed a number of delegated decisions regarding neighbourhood planning processes just to ensure that the specified time limits are met. Alongside that, a local planning authority should be proactive in assisting communities in preparing neighbourhood plans through data sharing, etc. As I say, take decisions as soon as possible and set out how those decisions will be taken and engage constructively with local communities through the process. Next slide, please, Simon. So the first stage is getting established. So the area of interest must be submitted, approved and designated. So that's largely a parish town council, but where there isn't a parish town council, communities can apply to set up a neighbourhood planning forum. And depending on whether it's a full parish or not, an application to designate the area is consulted on with 6 weeks with the local community. And after considering that application, decision is published on whether that group can then go on to prepare a neighbourhood plan. In terms of preparing plan at stage 2, that's largely community-led. So that's about drafting the plan, seeking views from the local communities about what that plan should contain, vision, goals, objectives, and drafting policies to ensure that the plan is generally in line with the local and national policies as outlined in previous slides. And then before submitting the plan at Regulation 14, they must publish the plan and seek comments on it for 6 weeks and consider those comments and adjust the plan accordingly, and then prepare a statement as to how the plan's been consulted on, how changes have been responded to. And then at the final stage, it's the plan submitted to the council, who then review it and consider whether it's suitable for publication. And then they publish the plan for 6 weeks and write representations on that plan. And then an independent examiner is appointed to consider the Neighbourhood Plan and associated evidence and the consultation report. And then they advise about whether the plan can be taken forward. The council then considers the examiner report and makes the decision on whether the plan can be sent to referendum. And then a referendum is held on the plan, which is hosted by the council. And if over 50% of the vote is in favour of the plan, then the plan is made. And then the council formalises that process for a formal decision also. In terms of progress to date, sorry, the slide might not come through clearly there, but effectively the green areas are areas where there's been a made neighbourhood plan, so therefore that plan forms part of the development plan in the borough. And the yellow.
Can you just name them for us, please, so it's clear?
Sorry?
Can you just name the areas,
The
please?
following slides do that. So apologies, Chair. So in terms of the 4 main neighbourhood plans, they're Loggerheads, Chaplain Hill, Chorlton, Mare and Aston Whitmore, Betley, Balderley, Rhine Hill and Madeley. And then those areas who are currently preparing a neighbourhood plan are Kidsgrove, Audley, Silverdale, Keele, and more recently, Bradwell, Maybank, Porthill and Woolstanton Neighbourhood Forum. So those areas are currently, the plan is they're working with our local communities in terms of preparing the plan at this stage. We have an area on our website which provides details about neighbourhood plans, provides background information about how what the plan contains and also how it's prepared. We've also got information available in terms of the different stages that the plans are at, and we also include information about tools and support that the council can offer in terms of local communities being able to take their neighbourhood plans forward. And that's the end of that short presentation.
Thank you. I'll just ask one burning question, which is related to the neighbourhood plan that covers Baldwin's Gate, because there was, I think, a statement made that over time, the relevance of the plan and how much it can be taken into account in decision-making process actually erodes. Could you give us more information on that, please? Councillor Fair, do you want to answer that or hand it over?
I think that would be best handled by the officer, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So for plans that are adopted, the neighbourhood plan forms part of the development plan, that's true to say, but there are many factors in terms of decision taking that come into play. And often it's the case that a balance or a judgment is made when considering the full suite of development plan policies. And there are mechanisms through the neighbourhood planning process for local communities to modify their plan at various stages. Well, I think it's also the case, rather than going into the specifics of that particular decision, that there are factors such as 5-year supply and other matters that come into play when decisions are made on applications. And of course, in the Baldwin's Gate case, that position is being tested at public inquiry, and an inspector will come to view on the weight that could be attributed to that plan when he issues his decision in middle of July, I understand.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, neighbourhoods that are putting this together spend a lot of time, money, effort. And if over time they start to erode, then those areas need to understand what they need to do to keep it compliant and to keep the weight of it. So is there a mechanism for achieving that?
As previously mentioned, there are ways in which local communities can review or modify their plans, and we as the council and the planning policy team and planning team generally are open to communities coming to speak to us about their plan, and to seek our advice and guidance about whether they could consider modifying the plan at various stages. So we're always open to that conversation if local communities want to get in touch with us.
Okay, thank you. Over to members. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your advice earlier. In the spirit of bipartisanship, I'd like to confirm that in lots of ways, the government is really very bad. And one of those ways, in all seriousness, is that in the Localism Act, the process of neighbourhood planning is laid out and it's held out to communities, particularly communities that have an established identity, either because they have a town council or a parish council, as a mechanism through which they can have much greater control over development in their local area and have a much bigger influence in shaping development. But the devil is in the detail, and the Localism Act runs to more than 1,000 pages if you print it out with all of its schedules. And if you read it in total, you understand that unless you have an adopted local plan in place, the weight that can be accorded to neighbourhood plans is inevitably going to be very, very weak. And it's really hard to enforce. And I know that from our development management meetings, it's really hard to enforce those wishes of local people without going through the process that we're now going through in adopting a local plan. That's yet another reason why it's very important that we follow through on that. I'll say something kind if I can, which is that I've been consistently impressed with the way in which communities that have adopted, so parish councils, neighbourhood forums that have chosen to follow this neighbourhood planning process, have engaged with the issues. It's not like petitioning something you don't like. It's not like being a horrible partisan hack like me and standing up in council. They actually engage critically, and have done, you know, in the ones that have been made already. They engage critically with these issues of housing need. They engage critically with the desire and the need for good allocation of employment sites. And that's a testament that the fact that we've got so much of our borough is now covered either by made or in development neighbourhood plans is good. It means that our officers are doing a really good job in helping those communities to form those plans and those ideas. So there's no question, again, at the end of that, but it's to say that I like the way in which our officers are supporting it. I like the way in which our administration endorses that. And I have been impressed, particularly by some of our rural communities in what they've produced in terms of neighbourhood plans. And I very much hope that it's possible for us to reward their efforts with a local plan further up the hierarchy that will be enforceable and that will see those communities realise their aspirations for the area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. It's a good point you make. I don't think there's any need for a comeback on that unless Councillor Fair wants to. No? Okay. Any other? Councillor Good.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank the officer for both the presentation and the report. Extremely timely, extremely helpful for councillors from Wolfstanton, Maybank and Bradwell, because our very newly recognised Neighbourhood Forum is about to begin the very tentative steps on working on a neighbourhood plan. So very timely and very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation as well. Chair, you brought up a lot of points that I also wanted to refer to, particularly, I think it was last October when Baldwin's Gate, there were a couple of people from Baldwin's Gate that presented and specifically spoke about the importance of the local or the neighbourhood plan, sorry, in terms of the importance and the weight of it. And actually, I have it here that Councillor Holland also included in his recommendations to refuse the application that indeed neighbourhood plans should be owned by the communities who put them together. I've been part of the steering group in Audley, and it's had such a positive effect on bringing communities together, making them really think about where they live and empowering communities to have a voice. And I think the only thing I would like to see is that our council, no matter what the small details may be in the localisation policies, is that we really respect those neighbourhood plans and use them as a very powerful way of building positive relationships between the Borough Council, those parishes and those areas that are embarking upon neighbourhood plans for themselves. It can only be a good thing. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Moffat. Again, good points raised. Thank you. Any other member wishing to speak? not in any hands raised, so I'll thank the officer for the presentation and the update. And we're on the home leg now. You'll be glad to hear. So we're on the last substantive item, which is our regular update of the Future High Street Fund and Town Deal, which will be presented by Councillor Sweeney.
Thank you, Chairman. It'll be introduced by Councillor Sweeney, be presented by Mr.
Sorry, introduced.
Yes, thank you. As I'm sure everybody in this room is aware, the government saw fit to give the borough over £50 million in Town Deal, Newcastle Town Deal, Kids Grove Town Deal, and the High Street Fund. Over £50 million, once in a lifetime opportunity for this council. And it's up to us to spend it as wisely as we can. Now, this is a regular item on this committee, and I won't go into any details on it because I don't want to spoil Mr. McGaney's thunder, because he's got a presentation for us. But I think it's interesting. I think you'll enjoy the progress we're making, and it's a chance this time to show us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeney. I'm a little surprised that people might enjoy this, but you'll never know. It's the end of a long night. Let's get through this quickly. Right, Future High Street and Town Deal. Last time I presented, we went into quite some detail around some of the projects that we're working on. We've made some progress on those. This is less detailed, but more of a fly through of what we're doing, because we are at an exciting stage. So York Place, that's going to planning committee on the 20th of June. That will give us permission, hopefully, to demolish the old York Place, which is now virtually empty of all retail units. There are 2 left in, but they'll be relocating out soon. Once we get that planning permission, we'll have permission to demolish. And because it's in a conservation area, we can't demolish until we know what we're putting back. So we're getting planning permission for the development I showed and talked to you through last time. And then hopefully we will be starting to demolish that building in September this year, with a view to it being finished by March next year, which will create a development site for our next development for York Place, which is the 2 blocks that we've got planned, with commercial on the ground floor and offices above. So we're very nearly at the delivery stage of that project, after all the work that we put in behind the scenes to get that ready. The funding for Rycroft development, we're going to put the Castle car park, which will be the first development that we'll put on Rycroft. Again, Cabinet approved the spend for that, subject to planning again, which will be on the 20th of June. Then the planning committee will hear both York Place and the car park. And we will hope to start that in summer of 2023. So hopefully August, September time again. 450 new car parking spaces, with the ground floor earmarked for disabled parking and EV charging points. So we're ticking the boxes in terms of sustainability and making sure that the car park is fit for purpose, fit for modern use. And there's been some press nationally around car parks being able to take the load of electric cars because they're heavy. We will be able to take the load of electric cars, one, because they're going to be on the ground floor mainly, but also that the structures above are suitable to take heavy cars. There's no need to worry about that. Castle car park will look like this. You can see that it's we've got 2 bookends, which are the cores, which will have the stairs and the lifts and the entry points, etc. And then there's the facade is of a golden bronzy color, which will have a motif of the castle, the Newcastle under Lyme logo, etc. The middle site, which is what we went into some detail again last time, is for the hotel. We've had that study complete, and we have been speaking with several hotel brands. And this afternoon I spoke to the Marriott Group, who are also very interested in putting a proposal into us. So if I just talk 110 mid-range hotel, we'll own it and operate it, but we need to go and get a design and build contractor to design it and cost it for us, to make sure that we can afford the building, because it's a commercial opportunity for the council. So we want to make sure that we've got a design that works, alongside a brand. So we'll be seeking a brand. So during the summer, we'll be starting procurement exercises for that. And the brands that will probably, or the groups of hotels that we're going to will probably be the Accor Group, the Hilton, Hotels International, which run the Holiday Inn, etc., and now the Marriott, and they've got some mid-range hotels that we can use. And I put these pictures up just so you can see the type of room. So they're not, you know, we're not going 5-star. We know where we stand, but they're better than the low range budget hotels that we've got currently. So we're trying to up the game for our hotel offer in the borough. One of the things that we've been reporting on is just how much we're actually spending, because spend shows delivery. So as you know, we spent the advanced deal several years ago. 49% of future high street has been spent, but when we start to spend the money for the car park and the demolition of York Place, that will very quickly get over 50% and near to 100%. Kidsgrove Town Deal, we spent 40% of our allocation for that, with a further 15 committed, so we'll be over 50%. And at the moment, we've spent 2% of the Newcastle Town Deal, but you know that came through later than Kidsgrove, and the grant agreement's now being finalised, which will encourage spend to go through. And then lastly, just some updates on where we're up to in Kidsgrove, station work, the share hubs, so the focus of attention now to get those projects up and running. And in Newcastle, the Digital Society, that's the building on Iron Market that we're doing in the Keele University are working on. That work will start in August. They've already started survey work and design work for those works to start in August. And we're still awaiting government approval for the Centre for Circus, which will be earmarked to go into a unit in Merrill Street and then relocate into York Place once that's complete. And as last time, just there's always risks around these things. We can't get away from the fact that it hasn't gone through planning yet. It's not across the line yet. We need to get it through the planning committee on the 20th. So any of you that are on the planning committee, but there are still inflationary pressures on everything we're doing at the moment. We're not seeing that that pressure abate, and also the borrowing that we're going to. It's still we're still going to have to borrow some money because we don't have it all in reserves, and borrowing is it's not cheap at the moment. It's due to get cheaper as we go through the program, but at the moment as it stands, it's still fluctuating. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is a very quick overview at the end of a very busy night of the great work we're doing on, and I say great because I'm doing it. Future High Street and Town Deal boards. Any questions?
Members, any questions? Councillor Fox-Hewitt.
Thank you, Chair. Just with regards to the Future High Street and Town Deal announcements, I noticed either yesterday or today, I think it was in the Sentinel, it created quite a large amount of interest and comments. Can the portfolio just remind members how and when residents of the borough have had a say in shaping the strategic vision for the town on projects such as the car park, the circus school and the hotel? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fox-Hewitt. The main thing we had an exhibition outside here in the library. And we got a lot of very, very favourable responses, really. But that's the main thing we've used, unless you've got anything else. Yeah. Go on.
As part of the process for bidding for the money, we had to show that we had public consultation and stakeholder engagement. So we employed a consultation expert, and they took a unit in Lancaster building for about 2 to 3 weeks, where they engaged with the residents and businesses, and that was advertised at the time. If we hadn't have done that and consulted on our plans and taken the consultation feedback into our plans, it would have been a negative mark against our application. So the government were quite happy with what we'd done, but we purposely employed somebody to do that for us. And the town deal board's always reflecting back to when we developed the business plans, etc. And we tried to get the right mix of people onto the town deal board that we would get feedback from across the community spectrum.
Any other members? Councillor Moffat.
First of all, thanks, Simon, for the presentation. But it's been bemusing me every time you do a presentation that your front slide says economy, environment and place. I know, but it gets me every single time, because I'd love the environment still to be part of this group, but somehow we've kicked the environment somewhere into the ether. But a serious question. I think it's a real consideration for us. For a long time, I've been asking pretty consistently in these meetings, could we have a plan B, C, etc., in terms of the economic crisis and how we're going to manage paying for all of these brilliant plans, exciting plans. It's never materialized, and I have asked for it literally from, I think, May 2022, because we are nationwide in an economic crisis, and the cost of these plans originally will have shifted somewhat, and I'd still like to see those contingencies. And in particular, after the announcement by Woking Council of kind of bankruptcy due to investment in projects of hotels, new shops, etc., I think that we need to be really careful, and I know that our residents will be concerned about that as well. We want exciting, reinvigorating our town centre, but we also need to know that we're going to be viable. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I think our residents want us to have an exciting, vibrant town centre, and we don't want to bankrupt ourselves. Well, obviously, but we have a Section 151 officer who will not sign things off if she's not content that they're affordable and manageable, and she signs things off. If the day comes when she says, "No, we can't do this," it won't happen. But you got to remember the long stop position is, if we don't do it, we hand the money back to the government. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to take this council forward, and projects like this will take it forward. And providing our finance team are content that it's affordable and manageable, I'm happy to go with their opinion. I'm not an accountant, they are, and if they're happy, I'm happy, basically. And I think it's the best thing for the people of Newcastle.
Just following that up, Councillor Sweeney, from the economic side of things, and in terms of borrowing, which I suspect is the biggest question, is that scrutinised at FRAPS?
Yes, it is, but I mean, we're not borrowed anything yet. But when we do it again, it's built into the MTFS. The interest charges are built in there. So yeah, it all goes through the system.
Yeah, because I think that's the important point.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. The idea of a council sort of like Woking. I mean, I know Woking's down south, so that's about all I know about Woking. But I know they've got themselves bankrupt. But the idea of us just borrowing money that we couldn't pay back, or we haven't got the wherewithal to pay back, it just wouldn't happen. Certainly not this authority. And the finance team wouldn't allow it to happen, and I wouldn't allow it to happen. I'm not, I don't want to make this council bankrupt. It's a certain fact.
Okay. Thank you.
So just on the Woking Council, I mean, the latest estimates are 1.8 billion that they're in deficit, and it's been going progressively worse since about 2006. So there's going to be a massive investigation into how that situation is, for 18, 17 years that they have been borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. That just hasn't happened here, and it won't happen. I mean, Sarah Wilkes, who is the Section 151 officer, is merciless with me about borrowing costs and paying it back, because everything that we borrow we have to pay back, and we have to make, the whole purpose of this is, one, to regenerate and to take that money that we've been given as a one-off, but we also have to make ourselves commercially viable as well, because we need to get revenue in, as well as the things we're developing will bring council tax and business rates in as well. But it's getting harder and harder as a council to be viable, so we've got to look at every means of making money, and that's Sarah's first question.
Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, just to come back, thank you for answering the question in part, at least. I will reiterate that we did ask for kind of worst case scenarios and rising of interest rates and costs of building materials, etc., etc. I'm not being flippant and I'm not trying to be overcritical. I am scrutinising and I am, you know, very reassured by the comments that I am reassured by the comments that you have made. And just one other thing, you know, it's a really important presentation you've given to us with so many different elements to it. I think I asked for this before as well at this meeting. It would be great for us to receive these presentations before so that we can think in detail about what questions we would like to raise. Okay, thank you.
Simon, do you want to come back?
Yeah, we'll sort that out.
And Councillor Grocott. Sorry, Gordon. It's getting late.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Right. First of all, I don't think any of us really discount the regeneration benefits and the employment benefits of the hotel. But the development seems to, I wouldn't say unusual, but it isn't quite what I would have expected, because I would have expected the authority to have sold the site and then, you know, the developer then taken all the risks. And I'm not project will be managed, because I don't think it's quite as simple as that. So if the officer could, you know, just for my benefit, perhaps, I'm sure probably all the members do understand, could sort of explain that. And then how are we going to minimize the risk? Because what obviously we don't want, any of us, is to build the hotel and then not find a tenant or a prospective owner for it.
Hotels don't build, hotel brands don't build hotels now. It's not the way that they operate. They work with a developer and an owner that will own the building. So in this case, we will own the building. And that's why we're going out to get a cost and a design. That brand that we select will work alongside the builder and designer to make sure that their specification, room sizes, F&E, FF&E criteria, color schemes are all factored into the cost. So we don't build something that a brand will then want changing. The brand won't operate that building. They will just be a quality control mechanism for a third party that will operate the hotel. So we in effect are the landlord and the owner, and the operator will operate it and will take a fee for that, as will the hotel brands take a franchise fee, etc. But because we own the business and we've got people operating it for us, we then retain the majority of the revenue that comes through that. In terms of making sure that it actually works, no hotel brand will put its name to a project that it thinks is going to fail. So part of the process we've gone through, which I tried to explain last time, which was we need a feasibility study doing to convince the brands that there is a requirement for a hotel in our area. And we've had that completed, and I've shared it informally with the brands to make sure that that is what they need. And they all four of them now have said that they are targeting North Staffordshire for a mid-range hotel, because there is, if you think about where we get people that stay at the Travel Lodge that go to Alton Towers, well, that doesn't mean to say if they're traveling that distance, they will come and stay in our hotel as well. But also the passing trade for business users and the white van man during the week is actually quite strong, and we want to try and get into that. So we're working on at the moment something like a 68% occupancy, which is the hotels are saying, well, that actually is, that's probably a conservative, but they reckon around 80-85% occupancy. It'll build up to that over 2 or 3 years. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to open like that, but all of the brands are saying we are targeting this area for a mid-range hotel.
Sure. Clarify, Chair. I mean, we are doing proper risk assessments and as we go along.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We are doing with everything we've done through the programme for the Future High Street and the town deal is we do it in a phase. stages. So we will commission a piece of work that will give us an outline of how much something will cost, the risks, etc. And then we will assess that, see whether that's what we want, whether we can afford it, and then we'll order the next piece of work. So, for example, on the car park, we did a viability feasibility study, which generated a certain cost, certain number of spaces. We looked at the income, etc. And at that point, we then ordered the next piece of work, which was to get it to planning. And that then, we're now at that end of that stage. The next phase is to order the construction work. So we're not actually ordering, I'm not saying to a contractor now, build me a hotel and I'll see you with the keys in 2 years' time. We are stage by stage analysing what we are trying to do, how much it's costing, what are the risks, are the same market forces in place, etc. So we're making those decisions, and there's a business case around that every time. So yes, we are working through the risks.
Any other members wishing to speak? No. Well, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Simon, and for taking the questions. So that concludes the substantive items. We now move on to agenda item 9, which is the work programme. Now, bearing in mind our previous comments and the fact that we're finishing it after 2.5 hours this evening, we've actually in September already got in the borough local plan, and we've already discussed the importance of getting at least a first look at the results of the public consultation. So we'll leave that as a substantive item. We have also the normal update, which Simon has given tonight, but we'll go through that in a bit more detail. And then we also are due the report of the Housing Task and Finish Group to come to main scrutiny. So I think if members agree that that's sufficient items for that particular agenda for September. And as ever, if you want anything adding after that, then please make me aware. Item 10, public question time. Well, we've covered that off in the HS2 agenda, and I've received no items of urgent business. So thank you for bearing with us this evening. Have a good what's left of the evening, and I'll close at 9:31. Thank you. That was the fact. You should have told me now that.